This is the story of Phaethon, son of Apollo, retold by Olivia Coolidge. Though Apollo always honored the memory of Daphne, she was not his only love. Another was a mortal, Clymene, by whom he had a son named Phaethon. So Apollo had a son named Phaethon with a mortal, half mortal, half god. Phaethon grew up with his mother, who, since she was a mortal, could not dwell in the halls of Olympus or in the palace of the sun. She lived not far from the east in the land of Ethiopia, and as her son grew up, she would point to the place where Eos, goddess of the dawn, lightened up the sky and tell him that is where his father dwelt. So pause there, guys. Remember we talked about Apollo, sometimes he's called Helios, drives the chariot across the sky, pulling the sun across the sky. That's how the sun gets across the sky, is that Apollo drives it, pulling behind his chariot. He would remind his comrades, or friends, of other sons of gods and mortal women, who, by virtue of their great deeds, had themselves become gods at last. He must always be first in everything, and in most things this was easy, since he was in truth stronger, swifter, and more daring than the others. Even if he were not victorious, Phaethon always claimed to be the first in honor. He could never bear to be beaten, even if he must risk his life in some rash way to win. So rash means like reckless or careless. So he always had to be the best. He always had to win. Here's a little visual of Apollo, I think, riding across the sky. I don't know. Most of the princes of Ethiopia willingly paid Phaethon honor, since they admired him greatly for his fire and beauty. There was one boy, however, Epiphos, who was rumored to be a child of Zeus himself. Okay, so that would be kind of even better than what Phaethon was. Phaethon was the son of Apollo, but Epiphos had this rumor that he was a child of Zeus. Since this was not certainly proved, Phaethon chose to disbelieve it and to demand from Epiphos the deference that he obtained from all others, meaning the respect. So basically Phaethon said, well, you can't prove that Zeus is your father, so you need to respect me like I'm the son of the god. Epiphos was proud too, and one day he lost his temper with Phaethon and turned on him, saying, "You are a fool to believe all that your mother tells you. You're all swelled up with false ideas about your father." Crimson with rage, the lad rushed home to his mother and demanded that she prove to him the truth of the story that she had often told. "Give me some proof," he implored her, "with which I can answer this insult from Epiphos. It is a matter of life and death for me, for if I cannot, I shall die of shame." "I swear to you," replied his mother solemnly, "by the bright orb of the sun itself, that you are his son." Remember, Apollo is the god of the sun. "If I swear falsely, may I never look on the sun again, but die before the next time he mounts the heavens." So what that means right there is she's basically saying, if I'm lying, strike me down. "More than this I cannot do, but you, my child, can go to the eastern palace of Phoebus Apollo. It lies not far away, and there go speak with the god himself." The son of Clymene leaped up with joy at his mother's words. The palace of Apollo was indeed not far. It stood just below the eastern horizon, its tall pillars glistening with bronze and gold. Above these, it was white with gleaming ivory, and the great doors were flashing silver, embossed with pictures of earth, sky, and sea, and the gods that dwelt therein. Okay, so this is the palace of Apollo. This is the palace where his father lives. Up the steep hill and the bright steps climbed Phaethon, passing unafraid through the silver doors, and stood in the presence of the sun. Here at last he was forced to turn away his face, for Phoebus, Apollo, sat in state on his golden throne. It gleamed with emeralds and precious stones, while on the head of the god was a brilliant diamond crown upon which no eye could look undazzled. Phaethon hid his face, but the god had recognized his son, and he spoke kindly and asked him why he had come. Then Phaethon plucked up courage and said, "I come to ask you that if you are indeed my father, if you are so, I beg you to give me some proof of it so that all may recognize me as Phoebus Apollo's son." The god smiled, being well pleased with his son's beauty and daring. He took off his crown so that Phaethon could look at him, and coming down from his throne, he put his arms around the boy and said, "You are indeed my son and Clymene's, and worthy to be called so. Ask of me whatever thing you wish to prove your origin, or where you come from, to men, and you shall have it." Phaethon swayed for a moment and was dizzy with excitement at the touch of the god. His heart leaped. The blood rushed into his face. Now he felt he was truly divine. Unlike other men, he did not wish to be counted with men anymore, meaning he didn't want to be considered a regular man anymore. He looked up for a moment at his radiant father. "Let me drive the chariot of the sun across the heavens for one day," he said. Apollo frowned and shook his head. "Oh, I cannot break my promise, but I will dissuade you if I can." Dissuade means try to convince someone not to do something. "How can you drive my chariot, whose horses need a strong hand on the reins? The climb is too steep for you. The immense height will make you dizzy. The swift streams of air in the upper heaven will sweep you off your course. Even the immortal gods could not drive my chariot, how then can you? Be wise and make some other choice." The pride of Phaethon was stubborn, for he thought the god was merely trying to frighten him. Besides, if he could guide the sun's chariot, would he not have proved his right to be divine rather than mortal? For that he would risk his life. Indeed, once he had seen Apollo's splendor, or how amazing and beautiful he is, he did not wish to go back and live among regular men. Therefore he insisted on his right until Apollo had to give way. When the father saw that nothing else would satisfy the boy, he bade the Hours bring forth his chariot and yoke the horses. The Hours were what they called his helpers that got his horse and chariot ready. The chariot was gold and had 2 gold-rimmed wheels with spokes of silver. In it there was room for 1 man to stand and hold reins. Around the front and sides of it ran a rail, but the back was open. At the end of a long pole there were yokes for the 4 horses. The pole was of gold and shone with precious jewels: the golden topaz, the bright diamond, the green emerald, and the flashing ruby. While the Hours were yoking the swift-pawing horses, rosy-fingered Dawn, that was the name of one of the Hours, hastened to the gates of heaven to draw them open. So she went to the gates to open them up. Meanwhile, Apollo anointed his son's face with magic ointment, that he might be able to bear the heat of the fire-breathing horses and the golden chariot. At last, Phaethon mounted the chariot and grasped the reins. The barriers were let down, and the horses shot up into the air. At first, the fiery horses sped forward up the accustomed trail, but behind them, the chariot was too light without the weight of the immortal god. It bounded from side to side and was dashed up and down. Phaethon was too frightened and too dizzy to pull the reins, nor would he have known anyway whether he was on the usual path. As soon as the horses felt that there was no hand controlling them, they soared up and with fiery speed into the heavens till the earth grew pale and cold beneath them. Because remember, they're carrying the sun behind their chariot. Phaethon shut his eyes, trembling at the dizzy, precipitous height, just meaning very, very high. Then the horses dropped down more swiftly than a falling stone, flinging themselves madly from side to side in panic because they were masterless. Phaethon dropped the reins entirely and clung with all his might to the chariot rail. Meanwhile, as they came near the earth, it dried up and cracked apart. Meadows were reduced to white ashes. Cornfields smoked and shriveled, and cities perished in fame. So now that the sun's brought down to earth, it's scorching everything and turning it into a desert. Far and wide on the wooded mountains, the forests were ablaze or on fire. And even the snow-clad Alps were bare and dry. So the Alp mountains that normally had snow on them, all the snow had been melted. Rivers steamed and dried to dust. The great North African plain was scorched until it became the desert that it is today, which we know now as the Sahara Desert. Even the sea shrank back to pools and caves until dried fishes were left baking upon the white-hot sands. So that's an explanation for why we find fish fossils on land today. At last, the great Earth Mother called upon Zeus to save her from utter destruction, and Zeus hurled a mighty thunderbolt at the unhappy Phaethon, who was still crouched in the chariot, clinging desperately to the rail. The dart cast him out, and he fell flaming in a long trail through the air. The chariot broke in pieces at the mighty blow, and the maddened horses rushed, snorting back to the stable of their master Apollo. Unhappy Clymene, which was Phaethon's mother, and her daughters wandered over the whole earth, seeking the body of the boy they loved so well. When they found him, they took him and buried him. Over his grave they wept and could not be comforted. At last, the gods, in pity for their grief, changed them into poplar trees, which weep tears of amber in memory of Phaethon. So poplar trees are the kind that you can see like the amber molasses leaking out of. And they say those are Phaethon's sisters crying for him in his memory.